They sent her to face the Duke's rejection. Instead, he asked her for the Final Waltz, a true story, England, 1883. The letter came on a Tuesday. It came the way most bad news comes, in a thin envelope, sitting on a silver tray, looking completely innocent of everything it was about to ruin. Sealed with dark blue wax, handwriting that meant it, the kind of handwriting produced by someone who had been taught penmanship by a person who considered it a moral matter. Alara Voss picked it up. She was always the one who picked things up. That was, in fact, the whole of it. The whole shape of her 24 years on Earth, if you pressed her for a summary. She was the one who picked things up, handled things, sorted them out before they became the kind of problems that required the family to actually discuss anything. She returned borrowed books and wrote the thank you notes and found the missing shoe before a dinner party, and stayed completely calm the morning the cook resigned 4 hours before Christmas supper, reorganizing the entire meal from memory while her mother sat in a chair pressing a handkerchief to her temple. She was useful, she was organized, she was invisible in the specific way that very good furniture is invisible, present, functional, noticed only when you need it, not thought about on the drive home. Her sister Cecily was the one they thought about. Cecily, who was 21, who had a laugh that made rooms reconfigure themselves around it, who had been described at various points in the past 3 years as enchanting, luminous, and by one particularly overwrought gentleman from the northern counties, the finest creature to emerge from the county in a generation. Alara had been described, in that same period, as capable, and also steady, and once, memorably, as a great comfort to the family, which was the kind of compliment that lands like a stone you're expected to be grateful for. She did not resent it. Or she had resented it for long enough that the resentment had gone quiet, the way a sore tooth eventually stops hurting and you forget it was ever a problem until you bite down wrong on something and suddenly you remember exactly where it lives. She turned the envelope over. The seal was intact. Duke Aldrich Merrow. She already knew what was inside. So it turned out, did Cecily. "I can't," Cecily said from the sofa. She was lying across it in the particular way she had. Not dramatically, not deliberately, just naturally, the way a cat finds the most inconvenient position in a room and occupies it with complete confidence. She had one arm over her eyes, the other was trailing a length of pale ribbon she had pulled from her sleeve sometime in the last hour and had been worrying at ever since, which was Cecily's version of thinking hard. "You can't what?" said Alara. "Go. I cannot go. I cannot sit across from him in that very large, very serious house and receive a formal rejection like some parcel that has been returned to sender. I will not do it. I am categorically unable." Alara looked at her. "You've known since last week it was coming," she said. "He courted you for 6 weeks and then stopped coming. That is not a mystery, Cecily. That is information presented in a fairly clear format. Knowing a thing and sitting across from it in a formal receiving room are 2 entirely different categories of experience, and I won't be told otherwise. What is the precise difference in your... The difference is that knowing it, I feel it from here, from this sofa, in a very manageable way. Sitting across from him in that room, I would feel it from inside the feeling, which is a significantly worse location. You know this. You are being difficult." Alara was about to point out that she was, by any reasonable measure, the least difficult person in the county, when their mother appeared in the doorway. She had a gift for appearing in doorways at moments of domestic negotiation, the particular gift of a woman who has spent 30 years presiding over a household and knows that the right moment to appear is after the argument has already been had and before the conclusion is reached, so that she may supply the conclusion herself and call it a decision. She looked at Cecily. She looked at Alara. She looked at the letter still in Alara's hand, which she had been holding this entire time with the absent focus of someone who has forgotten they are holding something, because the something is simply part of their hand now. "Alara will go," their mother said, and that was that. There was no architecture for argument when her mother used that voice. It was the voice of a woman who had already sorted the problem in her head and was simply announcing the conclusion to the room. Discussion was not part of the process. The process was, identify problem, assign the capable one, move on. "I'll go," Alara said, Cecily lowered her arm just enough to look at her. There was something in her expression, not quite guilt, not quite relief, the specific face of a person who has handed their bag to someone else on a long walk and knows it, and isn't entirely comfortable knowing it, but is also very grateful for the fact. "Thank you," she said. "You're very good at these things." Elara nodded. She went upstairs. She found her second-best gloves in the back of the drawer, the pair with the small, very neat mend at the left thumb, almost invisible. She'd done it herself with matching thread at 11 o'clock on a Sunday evening after the first pair was ruined at the Hartley wedding by a glass of red wine that someone else knocked over onto her hands. She pulled them on with the methodical care of someone completing an ordinary task that does not require feeling about it. Her best gloves were in their box, still wrapped. She kept them for occasions that were hers. She was not technically sure when the last one of those had been, but they were ready for the next one, whenever it came, which was a kind of optimism she did not think of as optimism because she did not tend to identify her own small acts of faith. This occasion was not hers. She smoothed the mend at the left thumb and went downstairs. Merrow Hall was not the kind of house you simply walked up to. It was the kind of house that made the walk up to it feel like an examination you had not adequately prepared for. The drive was long enough to give you time to reconsider your choices, if not your life, and lined with trees that were very old and very straight, the kind of trees that had been there long enough to have opinions and had cultivated them extensively. They did not lean toward you as you passed. They stood apart. They watched. The house itself appeared at the end of the drive in the way that powerful things appear, not dramatically, not announcing itself, simply being what it was, which was substantial and old and not remotely interested in impressing you. It was confident in the specific way of things that have never needed to try. Big stone, many windows, proportions so correct they were almost aggressive about it. Elara stepped down from the carriage with her back straight and her face arranged into the expression she kept for situations like this. Not the blank face. She had a few of them. This was the polished one, the competent one, the one that said, "I am perfectly comfortable, and I am here for a specific purpose, and I will complete that purpose without inconveniencing anyone, including myself." She was very good at that face. She'd been building it since she was 12, and her father died, and the building of it had been the most useful thing she'd done in the months that followed, though she hadn't thought of it in those terms at the time. The butler opened the door before she knocked. They always opened the door before you knocked in houses like this. It was one of their small tactics for establishing the terms of the visit before it began. "Miss Voss," he said, with the tone of a man who had expected someone slightly more notable. "Miss Elara Voss," she said, pleasantly and precisely. "On behalf of the Voss family, I believe His Grace is expecting a representative." He showed her in. Through a hall that was too large to be useful and existed purely to be impressive, which it was, in the way of something that knows exactly what it is doing, she was taken to a receiving room, smaller, warmer, lined with dark wood and portraits. So many portraits. She sat in a high-backed chair and folded her hands and waited. She was good at waiting. Another skill no one had asked her to develop, but which she had developed anyway. The way you develop skills that the people around you happen to need. She was an expert at productive waiting, the kind where your hands stay still and your face stays pleasant, and underneath all of that your mind is doing something quietly and of its own choosing. Today it chose the portraits. There were 8 of them, 8 framed ancestors of varying degrees of severity, each one done in the dark, assured style of painters who are very serious about the importance of their subjects and want you to understand this. The people in them looked, to a one, like they had opinions about everything, and found most of it wanting. She started on the left, a thin-faced man in mid-17th century clothes who had the expression of someone perpetually receiving bad news and taking it as a personal insult, Lord profoundly inconvenienced. A soft-faced woman with very sharp eyes who looked like she was adding you up and coming to conclusions. Lady already decided. A man in military dress who was trying very hard to look like he wasn't thinking about something unpleasant and failing. Colonel elsewhere. She was 3 names in when she reached the portrait on the far right. Florid, Heavy-set, mid-Victorian, dressed in the overwrought style of a man who took his appearance very seriously without having reliable guidance, and paused. This one had a specific face, not just disapproving, actively put out. The face of a man for whom the world had never arranged itself correctly, and who had decided, at some point, that this was the world's fault. Lord Faint Disapproval, she decided, and then immediately amended it. No, that was too gentle. He was more than faint. He was deeply, committedly, professionally disapproving. He had made it his life's work. She was mid-revision when the door opened. She did not hear it. The carpet was thick and the hinges were well maintained, and she was 2 clauses into her internal indictment of Lord Faint Disapproval when she became aware that the quality of the room's silence had changed, the particular way silence changes when a space that was empty is no longer empty, and she turned. He was standing just inside the door, not dramatically, not positioned for effect, just standing, the way a person stands when they have walked into a room and found something they did not entirely expect and are taking a moment with it. He was dark-haired. He was broad in the way of a man who had never needed to think about taking up space, not aggressively, not performatively, just genuinely, the way some people are simply built with the particular solidity that makes the room arrange itself slightly around them without their having to ask. He was, and she took this in and filed it efficiently in the compartment marked irrelevant and moved on. Someone who made a person feel, standing across the room from him, very aware of the precise outline of themselves. He was watching her, not in any forward or inappropriate way, just watching, with the expression of a man who has spent time learning to look at things properly before he forms an opinion of them. The expression was not amusement, it was not contempt, it was something more careful than either, something that was taking its time and had not yet arrived at a conclusion. She started. The light in this room is very good for studying portraiture, he said. Is it? Not a question. She gathered herself, a small invisible gathering, just the setting of the shoulders, and said, Your Grace, I'm here on behalf of the Voss family. My sister sends her regrets, and I know why you're here, he said. He walked across the room, not quickly, not slowly, just the walk of someone who always moves at the speed they choose, and sat, not directly across from her in the way of formal meetings, but slightly to the side, at an angle, as though he hadn't entirely decided what kind of meeting this was going to be yet. She delivered the message. She had rehearsed it twice in the carriage, with the calm focus of someone who values precision in difficult tasks. It came out correct and clean, and without a single unnecessary feeling attached to it. He listened to all of it. Then he said, The regrets are not necessary. There is nothing to regret. Still, she said, it is the proper form. It is the practiced form, he said, which is not quite the same thing, in my experience. She looked at him. He was doing the watching thing again. She kept her face still. Is there anything else your family wished to convey? She said. Professionally pleasant. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not awkward. There was nothing awkward about him, she noticed. Nothing that scrambled for filling of empty space. But considered. The kind of quiet that precedes something. Why did you come, he said. You, specifically. Not your sister. My sister was indisposed this morning. I see. He paused. Is she often indisposed when something difficult needs addressing? The question was not unkind. It was in fact surprisingly accurate, delivered with the neutrality of genuine curiosity rather than criticism. She found herself briefly without the correct response, which did not happen to her often. I manage these things for the family, she said finally. It is simply a practical arrangement. He looked at her the way people look at a sentence they are not sure they fully believe. Not suspicion, just careful attention to the words chosen. A practical arrangement, he said. Not a question. Just the phrase, returned to her. It landed differently hearing it back. She smoothed the mend at her left thumb with precise, unnecessary care. Your Grace, she said, beginning to rise. The man in the corner, he said. She stopped, sat back down, looked at him. He nodded toward the portrait on the far right, the one she had just finished condemning in considerable internal detail. My great-great-uncle Reginald, he said. He was, by all family accounts, absolutely and comprehensively insufferable. He once refused to attend a dinner because the soup was served at the wrong temperature, despite the fact that it was his own cook, his own kitchen, and he had simply failed to come down at the right time. He wrote formal letters of complaint to the gardener about the angle of shadows in the afternoon. He once sent back a letter from his own son because the handwriting was, and I quote, morally indifferent. She stared at him. He spent, the Duke continued, entirely straight-faced, the last 12 years of his life composing formal complaints to weather. Not to anyone in particular, simply to weather, as a category of entity that had repeatedly failed to meet his standards. She laughed. Before she could prevent it, before she could route it through the part of her that managed these things, she laughed. Not the polite version, the actual version, the one that came from somewhere below the composed surface, too big for the careful container she kept herself in, lasting 2 full seconds before she could rein it back. She pressed her lips together, looked at him. His face had not done anything so obvious as smile, but the expression around his eyes had shifted in a way she couldn't precisely account for. 3 volumes, he added. Of complaints, she said. To weather. Extensively documented. He had particular feelings about March. She looked at the portrait. At Reginald, in all his florid, permanent disapproval. She thought, I had him down as Lord Faint Disapproval, and I was being generous by several degrees. You came here expecting to be dismissed, the Duke said. Simple, direct. The way observation sounds when it hasn't been softened for delivery. Not cruel, just true, in the clean, unpadded way of a person who sees things as they are and says so without apology. She looked at him. I came to complete a task, she said quietly, which I have done. She was looking at the portrait when she said it, not at him. She stood. She said the correct things in the correct order. She left. The carriage ride home was 20 minutes. She looked out the window at the fields going past, pale and November damp, and she thought about nothing at all, which was something she was practiced enough at that it usually worked, and did not, this time, quite work. 3 weeks passed. They were ordinary weeks in all the ways that mattered. Cecily moved on from the Duke with the easy adaptability of a person who has many options and knows it. No drama, no extended grief. Just the natural rerouting of attention toward the next thing that was offering it. A Mr. Holt had begun calling. He was pleasant, well-situated, and looked at Cecily the way most people eventually looked at Cecily, which was with the specific expression of a person who has found exactly what they were looking for and is slightly amazed by their own luck. Their mother was cautiously pleased. Cecily was pleased the way she was pleased by most things. Warmly, generously, without too much analysis. Ilara helped with the correspondence. She kept the social calendar. She located Cecily's misplaced dance card from the Thornton dinner and the right shade of thread for the hem of the blue dress, and the specific novel that Mr. Holt had mentioned, and that Cecily now urgently wanted to have read before he called on Thursday. She did not think about the portrait conversation, or, more precisely, she did not think about it intentionally. It appeared anyway, twice a day, in the small gaps between tasks, the 4 minutes before dinner when she was waiting for the bell, the 20 seconds between finishing one letter and beginning the next. It arrived without announcing itself, and she catalogued it briskly and put it in the folder marked irrelevant and moved on. The folder was getting rather full. She was also, she noticed, spending slightly more time than usual in the drawing room with the good light, which she justified to herself on the grounds that the north-facing rooms were cold in November, and said nothing further about it. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning. The Duke of Merrow's Autumn Ball. The last major social event of the season. 200 guests. Merrow Hall. The Friday of the following week. Her mother read it twice, once for information and once for implication. Then she folded it and set it down with the careful movement of someone who has just worked out the shape of something. Cecily will need a chaperone, she said. Ilara was already standing up to go and find her second-best gloves. She stopped herself, turned, went to the drawer with the box in it instead, opened the box, looked at her best gloves, still wrapped, still waiting. She closed the box, went to the other drawer. She was, after all, going as the chaperone. The second best pair was the correct choice. She was practiced at the correct choice. She pulled them on and smoothed the mend at the left thumb and went downstairs and said she would be happy to go. She counted them within the first 4 minutes of arriving. 1, 2, 3, 4. Moving across her field of view as they entered the room. 5 behind the orchestra platform, 6 above the main floor, 7 in the far corner above the doors to the terrace. This last one slightly smaller than the others, slightly less assertive, which she felt was the most honest of the 7, but did not say so aloud. Counting things was useful when you were the chaperone at a party that belonged to someone else. It gave the eyes a purpose, kept the hands still, made the waiting look like orientation rather than what it was. Cecily was absorbed by the room within 3 minutes of entering it. She knew people everywhere, not in the manufactured way of social climbers, but in the natural way of someone who is simply delightful to be around, and whom everyone is therefore always happy to see. By the time Alara had finished counting the 7th chandelier, Cecily had already been claimed by a cluster of people near the center of the floor, and was laughing at something, and the sound of it carried across the room the way her sounds always did, warm and easy, effortlessly itself. Alara found her place. All large rooms have a correct edge for the people at them on other people's terms, and she had been finding that edge in rooms like this since she was 17. It was between the 6th and 7th chandelier tonight, slightly left of the second set of doors, near enough to the terrace exit to be useful if Cecily needed air, and close enough to the refreshment table to have something in her hand that justified standing still. She collected a glass of something warm. She stood. People spoke to her, several of them, over the course of the first hour, in the pleasant and intermittent way that people speak to capable, good-listening women at social events, warmly, briefly, with genuine if passing fondness. She remembered things about them, the names of children, the outcomes of situations they'd mentioned months ago, the specific grievance with the Northfield drainage that Mr. Alderton had been describing in installments since spring. They appreciated being remembered. They moved on. She was, in this way, very well suited to a room like this. She made people feel attended to. She gave nothing that required attending to in return, which was, she knew, part of why people found her easy. The orchestra moved through its program. The dancing in the center of the floor was formal and beautiful, and she watched it with the settled appreciation of someone watching a thing they have no part in but can still admire. She moved slightly, repositioned herself between the 6th and 7th chandelier again, it was the better angle, and thought, vaguely and privately, about whether the soup had needed more salt. It had, she thought. Not dramatically, just slightly. The cook had been nervous. She'd noticed at the beginning of the evening when the first course came out, and there was a flatness to it. Not bad, just not quite right. The kind of thing most people wouldn't catch, but that, once caught, quietly insists on itself. She was still turning this over when someone appeared to her left. 7, said a voice. She turned. Duke Aldrich Merrow was standing approximately 2 feet away, looking up at the chandelier she had just finished looking at, his hands behind his back, in the easy posture of a man who is in his own house but is not, in this moment, performing being the host. "I'm sorry," she said. 7, he said again. "You counted them. All of them, from left to right, starting when you arrived. I've been watching. She started, and stopped, because there was no version of the explanation that did not confirm what he had just said. She had counted them. He had watched her count them. These were both simply true. "I counted them too," he said. "When I was 12, the night of my first formal dinner here, while the guests arrived, I got to 9, before I realized I had miscounted and had to start again." He paused. "There are 7. "I know," she said. "I know you know." She looked at him. He was looking at her with that expression, the careful one, the unnameable one, the one she had been storing in the irrelevant folder for 3 weeks. The folder had apparently not held. The expression was right in front of her, in full light, connected to his face, and she could not put it away because she was directly in front of it. "I was told you were here," he said. "I'm here as a chaperone," she said. I know what your role is tonight." She waited. "I also know that is not all of what you are," he said. "Here or anywhere." The soup criticism she had been internally composing went completely and immediately silent. "Your Grace," she said, very evenly. "I've thought about what you said," he said, "in the receiving room, about managing things for your family, about practical arrangements. I've thought about it with some regularity." The glass was warm in her hand. She was holding it with slightly more attention than it required. "It was not a significant statement," she said. "It was an honest one, which in my experience are usually the significant ones." Across the room, the orchestra reached the end of its current piece. The musicians paused. The dancers separated slightly, reformed, waited. The conductor raised his baton. He announced, "The Final Waltz." She watched the conductor's baton rise. The Final Waltz. She was familiar with it from the edge. The last dance of the evening, the one that carried weight in the specific social vocabulary of a room like this. Not just a dance but a declaration, visible to everyone, remembered afterward, carried home in the exact wording of the descriptions people gave the next morning over breakfast. Who danced it with whom was a sentence the whole room read and kept. She had been at many of these evenings. She had watched many final waltzes from her position near the wall. She had once helped Cecily's hair after a final waltz dislodged the left side of it, and she had walked their mother out before one started, when their mother's knee was bad, and she had retrieved 2 forgotten raps during the applause after one ended, and she had never, not once, been on the floor for one herself. None of that was complaint. It was simply inventory. She was good at inventory. He extended his hand. Not to the room, not to an ambient invitation in the general direction of available partners. His hand moved forward, into the specific and particular space between them, palm slightly up, unhurried, directed at her and at no one else. She could see the neat line of his cuff against his wrist. She could see that his face had already arrived at the decision before his arm had moved, because everything about him was settled. "Miss Voss," he said, "would you do me the honor?" She stood completely still. Her mind did what her mind did in moments that don't have established procedures. It ran through everything very fast, and at the same time, the glass in her hand. Cecily somewhere across the floor, already moving toward her own partner. 200 people in the room, and at least a third of them the kind of people who filed these moments for use in conversation later. The specific weight of what it meant that he was asking her, standing at the edge, in her second-best gloves, not even technically a proper guest, the chaperone, the capable one, the 7 chandeliers, the portrait of Reginald, and his 3 volumes of formal complaints to March. The way he had said the word dismissed in the receiving room, flat and careful, as if naming something he intended to do something about. His hand was still there. She thought, this is always where someone else receives the thing, and I manage the afterwards of it. She thought, I should put down the glass first. She thought, last, quietly, in the small voice she only used for things she was not ready to speak at full volume. He came to find me. Not Cecily, not any of the luminous and appropriate women in this room, of whom there were many, all of them better positioned for exactly this. He had walked to the wall between the 6th and 7th chandelier and said 7 and waited. He had stood there in his own house at his own ball with 200 people looking at him from the corners of their eyes, and he had waited. For her. For the one who counted chandeliers and managed things and wore the wrong gloves. She set the glass down on the table beside her. She took his hand. The mend at her left thumb pressed against his glove. She felt it, and she did not care. Her best gloves were in their box at home. She was wearing the second best ones, and the floor of this room had, she was quite certain, seen considerably worse than her. And she was. She was perfectly fine. The actual version, not the performed one she'd been working with for 24 years, but the thing underneath it, which she hadn't accessed in long enough that it took her a moment to recognize it. They stepped onto the floor. Gissi had learned to waltz at 15. A woman in stiff gray linen had come to the house for 6 Tuesdays and drilled her and Cecily both in the steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. while a cousin played at the piano with the diligence of someone doing it correctly and the enthusiasm of someone who would rather be elsewhere. She had been competent at it. She was competent at most things she was taught, not because she had any particular gift, but because she paid attention and practiced, and didn't take shortcuts. He was a good dancer in the way of a man who had been trained seriously and had long since stopped thinking about it, which is the only way to actually be good at dancing. The body has to know the steps well enough to stop noticing them, so the rest of you is free to be present. He led them into a position slightly away from the busiest part of the floor. She noticed it, noticed that he had placed them toward the edge, away from the center where everything was most observed and most exposed, and she noticed that he had done it without consulting her, and that it had been the right choice, and that he had known it was the right choice without being told. She filed this fact carefully. The music started. 1, 2, 3. Turn. She kept her gaze at the appropriate level, his shoulder, the middle distance, the practiced placement of eyes for this kind of occasion. She had a perfectly clear view of the room from here, which she did not need and was not using. "You're waiting," he said. "I'm dancing," she said. "You're dancing and waiting for this to make sense. You have a very expressive silence, Miss Voss." She turned with him. 1, 2, 3. The hem of her dress swept the floor in the correct arc. "Why did you ask me?" she said. Plain and direct. The music gave her permission to be plain. It covered things. "Because I wanted to." "That is not an explanation." "No," he said. "It's an answer. They are different things. Explanations justify. Answers simply name what is true." She looked at him then, properly, directly, which she had been carefully avoiding. He was looking back in the same way, direct and considered, and not rushing anything toward a conclusion it hadn't reached on its own, and she met it and held it for a full beat before she said, "I came to your house to deliver a rejection on behalf of someone else. That is the complete accounting of our prior acquaintance. You came to my house," he said, "and delivered your errand correctly and completely, and then stood in my receiving room and gave my great-great-uncle a name he will, unfortunately, never know about." Lord Faint disapproval was quite restrained, I thought. I was being generous. He almost smiled. Not quite. The corner of it just. "I heard all of it," he said, "from the door. You had begun with the man by the window." "Lord profoundly inconvenienced," she said, without thinking. He did smile then. Small, real, the kind that doesn't announce itself. "He was not profoundly inconvenienced," the Duke said. "He was simply disappointed in his son, who sold half the estate's eastern land without consulting anyone, which is, I would argue, a reasonable thing to be disappointed about. He looks like he was born disappointed, and the land was simply a late confirmation. That is, I'm afraid, probably also true." 1, 2, 3. She missed a half step, not badly, recovered immediately, but he felt it through his hand, and she knew that he knew, and she looked up at him. "What did you name Reginald?" he said. She looked at him steadily. Lord Faint disapproval, which was, as I said, generous. I had amended it to something stronger by the time you arrived. "What had you amended it to?" "Lord professionally aggrieved by all existing conditions." He laughed this time, a real one, brief and genuine, that changed the whole character of his face for the 2 seconds it lasted, and then was gone, replaced by the careful expression, but she had seen it, and it was a different kind of information than she had had before. She let her own mouth do what it had been wanting to do for several minutes, and permitted herself a real smile, not the managed version. It was out before she'd decided to let it out, and she didn't retrieve it. "Formal complaints to Weather," she said. 3 volumes. What were the titles? I don't know that there were formal titles. They were simply categorized by year, and March had the most entries. By a considerable margin. He felt March had a personal agenda. Did he specify what the agenda was? Cold, primarily. He objected to the cold. He felt it was both unnecessary and targeted. She turned with him, and the room turned around them, and she had, for the length of several bars of music, completely lost track of the fact that 200 people were watching. Not because she forgot. She didn't forget. She was not the kind of person who forgot rooms, but because the room had moved to the back of things and she and he had moved to the front of things, which was a reversal she was not accustomed to. "You looked for me when you arrived," she said, not an accusation, just a naming of the thing she had observed. "Yes. You told me you were told I was here. The butler told me. I had asked him to." She processed this quietly. He had asked the butler to tell him when she arrived. He had gone about his party, hosting 200 people, and asked his butler to come and find him the moment she came through the door. "Why?" she said. "Because I have been looking forward to seeing you again since you left my house 3 weeks ago. Straightforward, not decorated. And because I was aware that if I didn't come and find you, you would spend the entire evening being useful to everyone else, and I would lose my chance." 1, 2, 3. The music was in the long curve now, the part that starts to resolve, the part that tells you the ending is coming. "I am," she said quietly, "not in the habit of being found." "I know," he said, "that's not the same as not being worth finding." Here is what she did not say, while the music played and the room moved around them and the final waltz wound toward its end. She did not say that she had been the errand her entire adult life, that her competence had been, from a very young age, the family's most reliable resource and therefore its most used one, that she had written, on behalf of various family members over the past 8 years, 21 letters she had not felt, attended 16 events at which she was present but not a guest, managed 4 crises she had not created, recovered 3 borrowed objects and 1 borrowed dog, and been described on approximately 40 separate occasions as steady, reliable, or a great comfort, which added up to a portrait of someone who was immensely valued and never quite seen. She did not say that being very good at other people's things produces a specific kind of hollowness that is hard to locate because it doesn't live in the body. It lives in the part of you that notices the difference between being needed and being wanted, and has spent a long time learning not to make that distinction out loud. She did not say that she had understood, on the carriage ride home from his receiving room 3 weeks ago, that the word dismissed had not been judgment. It had been recognition. He had seen what she was doing, the capable, seamless, invisible doing of things on behalf of other people, and had named it plainly, without the social padding people usually applied to observations that true. She had not known what to do with that. She had put it in the irrelevant folder, and it had remained there, taking up more and more room, which is what happens with things that are not actually irrelevant. She did not say that she had worn the second-best gloves tonight out of habit, and a kind of preemptive self-management, the same way a person doesn't take out the good china for a meal that doesn't belong to them, and that she was aware, now, on the dance floor in front of 200 people, with his hand warm against hers, that this was perhaps the single most private thing she had done in years, the private recognition that she had been wrong about whose evening this was. She did not say any of it. She danced. 1, 2, 3. The music ended the way good music ends, not abruptly, not trailing off, but with the specific intention of something that has done what it set out to do. Long notes, then shorter, then a resolution that sits in the chest for a moment before it disperses. They stopped. The other couples separated, applauded in the pleasant, practiced way of people at these events. She stepped back the correct distance. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you," he said. A beat, full rather than empty. "Miss Voss." She waited. "I would like to call on you. Not your family, you. On a Wednesday afternoon, if that suits, at whatever hour you prefer." Around them, the room was resuming itself. Couples dispersing, conversations restarting, the ordinary noise of a party returning after the particular held-breath quality of a final waltz. Cecily was somewhere across the floor, radiant and in her correct element. The 7 chandeliers burned overhead, none of them subtle. She looked at him. He was waiting in the way she had noticed he waited, not filling the space, not nudging toward an answer, just being present in the pause and leaving room in it for whatever came next. "I am not," she said carefully, "the obvious choice. I know what choices were available to me tonight," he said. "I walked past all of them to come and stand next to you by the 7th chandelier." "The 6th and 7th, she said. "The 6th and 7th, he agreed. "The 7th was the better angle." "I thought so too," she said. He looked at her with the expression she had now spent 6 weeks trying to name and had finally, in the last quarter hour, identified. It was simply attention. Full, uncomplicated, chosen attention. The expression of a person who has decided what they are looking at and is looking at it without apology and without performance. She had not been looked at this way she couldn't calculate when, possibly never. "You may call on me," she said. Very quiet, very level, not the managed version, the actual one. The carriage home was eventful. Cecily had recovered from her surprise by the time they reached the street. She was, by nature, extremely adaptable, which was one of her better qualities, and was in the process of having approximately 6 opinions about it simultaneously. She delivered them in quick succession, not unkindly, with the bright, interested energy of someone who is genuinely intrigued by something she did not predict. The Duke, her sister, the Final Waltz, the way the whole room had watched, the way Alara had looked when she accepted his hand, which Cecily said was like watching someone open a window they'd forgotten was a window. Alara was not sure what that meant, but thought it was probably accurate and said nothing. Their mother sat very straight for the first 12 minutes of the journey home and said absolutely nothing, which meant she was doing very serious arithmetic in her head. When she finally spoke, it was careful and measured and contained, below its surface, the particular complex feeling of a woman who had organized the world in a specific way for a long time and has just been handed information that requires her to reorganize it. "Ilara," she said, "I need you to be clear-headed about this." "I am always clear-headed," Alara said, which was true, and which her mother knew, and which was also therefore slightly pointed. It is not what I had planned for you." "No," said Alara, "I know it isn't." The Duke was. Cecily was. "Cecily is happy with Mr. Holt," said Alara, looking out the window. "She has been happy with Mr. Holt for 3 weeks. I arranged the correspondence. You are not losing anything you still had." A pause that lasted through a long curve in the road and out the other side. "He chose me," Alara said, still to the window, quietly, without drama, "not because I was convenient, not because I was next in the family. He walked across his own ballroom at his own party and he came to find me. I was the one he came to find." The carriage was quiet. Cecily said, "I would have found that unbearably romantic if it had happened to me, and I find it unbearably romantic that it happened to you instead." Alara turned and looked at her sister. Cecily was watching her with her ribbon in her hand again, turning it over, and her face was open and genuinely warm, and there was nothing behind it that wasn't kind. "Lord Faint Disapproval," Cecily said. "Is that actually what you named him?" "All of them," Alara said. "There were 8. "Tell me," said Cecily. So she told her. All 8 names, in order from left to right around the receiving room, with the full reasoning behind each one, and a summary of Reginald's documented war with March. By the time she reached the 6th portrait, her mother had stopped pressing her lips together and was looking out her own window with the small, private expression of a woman recalibrating something she had held a particular way for a long time and is adjusting, carefully, to holding differently. They were almost home before she spoke again. "He seemed," her mother said, as though the words were coming out measured, "a serious man." "Yes," said Alara. "Serious men," her mother said, and stopped. "Serious men tend to mean what they say." "Yes," said Alara again. She looked out the window at the dark going past. The city was beginning at the edges now, lamplight appearing at intervals, the ordinary geography of home. She held the thing in her chest that she didn't have a word for yet, the new thing, the warm, unmanaged thing, and let it sit there without putting it anywhere. For now it could just be there. That was enough. He came on a Wednesday, not to the house generally, not to the family's sitting room. He told the butler he was calling on Miss Alara Voss specifically, and the butler told her mother, and her mother processed this information for several minutes in the hall before she showed him into the small back sitting room, the one with the good north-facing light that was Alara's room in the actual sense, the room she kept her things in, where she wrote her letters and read and was most herself when no one needed her to be anything in particular. She was in that room when he arrived. She had known he was coming, and she had, that morning, gone to the drawer and opened the box and taken out her best gloves and put them on. They fit exactly as they had always fit. She had pressed the left thumb, and there was no mend there, and she had smoothed it anyway, out of habit. He noticed. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything, but she saw it in the small shift of the expression around his eyes when he came in and looked at her hands, and she knew he had noticed, and they both let it mean what it meant, without making it into a statement. They talked for nearly 2 hours, not about anything required, not about family circumstances or social positioning or what was expected or appropriate. They talked about Reginald and whether his complaints had improved in quality as they increased in volume, and whether March had ever issued a response. They talked about what it is to be the person in a family who handles things, whether that is, as some would have it, a privilege of temperament or a role that gets assigned and then filled, because filling it becomes its own kind of identity. They talked about what it means to be noticed and how you know when something is genuine, and how the genuine thing and the performed thing can look identical from a distance and entirely different up close. He listened the way she had noticed him listen, completely, without preparing his response while she was still talking, without waiting for the pause so he could redirect. He was simply there for it. She was not used to being listened to that completely. She found it, at first, slightly disorienting, the way bright light is disorienting when you've been in a dim room, and then, gradually, not. He came back the following Wednesday, and the one after. By the 4th visit, her mother had stopped appearing at the edge of the doorway to verify that the conversation remained within appropriate parameters. By the 5th, Cecily had stopped reporting to Alara afterward with bright-eyed updates and had started simply treating it as a fact of the week's schedule. By the 6th, Alara had stopped waiting for the moment when it would become something she was managing on behalf of someone else. It remained hers. Every Wednesday, it remained hers. In November, on a Wednesday, in the small back sitting room with the good north light, he asked her to marry him. He said her name first, just her name, nothing attached to it, no formal prefix or social scaffolding. And then he asked, plainly and directly, in the same manner he did everything, without decoration, without apology, without filling the silence that followed with anything except his own steady presence. She said yes. He said her name again, after. Just her name. She thought she might never get tired of hearing it said that way, which was not a thought she had said aloud but which she suspected he could tell, because he had gotten very good at reading her silences. Later, months later, in a room at Merrow Hall that was entirely hers, that she had arranged herself with the books she wanted, and the light she preferred, and the small writing desk that had come from her family home, because she had asked for it, and he had simply made sure it arrived. She sat and looked at the portrait of Reginald. He had moved it there, not as a joke, though there was some joy in it, as a gift, because she had mentioned once, in passing, that she'd grown somewhat fond of his face, and that it felt wrong to leave him in the receiving room now that she knew his full history. He had moved it without commentary, and it had appeared in her room one morning while she was elsewhere, and when she came back and saw it on the wall she had stood in the doorway for a moment with a feeling she didn't try to name. Reginald looked at her from the wall with his florid, permanent dissatisfaction. 3 volumes, she thought. About weather. About March specifically. I understand you, she told him, conversationally. You were a difficult man, but everyone thought you were born difficult, and I suspect you had your reasons. He did not change expression. He was not going to change expression. That was one of his more reliable qualities. From somewhere in the house, down the stairs and somewhere along the left corridor, she heard her husband's voice, low and unhurried, speaking to the steward about something to do with the western boundary wall, the steady, practical sounds of someone managing the ordinary life of a large house on a Tuesday afternoon. The sound of him going about the world. She had not stopped finding it remarkable, the sound of him going about the world, and this being her world too. She did not think she was going to stop finding it remarkable any time soon. She opened the drawer of the writing desk. At the back, behind the letters and the ribbons and the small necessary objects of a daily life, was a pair of gloves, the second best pair, the ones with the small mend at the left thumb, almost invisible, very neatly done. She held them for a moment. She thought about the drawer at her mother's house, about the box, about a girl who kept her best gloves for occasions that were hers, and had developed, over many years, very few occasions that were hers. She thought about a receiving room and 8 judgmental ancestors, and a man who had stood at the door and heard her talking to his portraits, and had decided, on the basis of this, that she was the person he had been looking for. She thought, I went to his house in these gloves. I was wearing these gloves when he asked me to dance. I was wearing the second best pair at the moment the best thing in my life began. She folded the gloves carefully and put them back. She had not worn them since the night of the ball. She was not going to throw them away. They were part of the story, and the story was hers, and she had become, in the last year, considerably more careful about things that were hers. She looked at Reginald one last time. March, she said, was simply doing its job. He stared back at her, unconvinced, as he always had and always would. She nodded at him. She closed the drawer. She went downstairs to find her husband. She was wearing her best gloves. She had been wearing them for quite some time now, and she intended, going forward, to continue.